You know what they say about first impressions? Well, mine of humans was about to get spectacularly wrong. My name is Vex Terran, and I'm what you might call a xenobiology student at the Galactic Academic Institute. 4 arms, purple chitinous skin, compound eyes that can see through 17 different spectrums, and a nervous system that makes me jump at the sound of a dropped stylus. Perfect qualifications for studying the most terrifying species in known space, right? Wrong. So very hilariously wrong. The semester had started normally enough. Professor Clack9 had introduced our new curriculum, Advanced Studies in Deathworld Species Integration. Translation? How not to wet yourself when meeting creatures that evolved on planets, trying to kill them every microsecond of their existence. Students. Clack9's voice buzzed through the translator, his insectoid mandibles clicking nervously. Today, we begin our most challenging unit, Human Behavioral Analysis. A collective shudder rippled through the lecture hall. 37 different species, all united in our shared terror of these bipedal nightmares from Sol 3. The Vorthak twins in the front row actually started molting from stress. The crystalline Zendari student began emitting that high-pitched whine they make when scared. Now, Clack9 continued, though his own antennae were twitching like he'd stuck them in an electrical socket. The humans have been remarkably cooperative with our exchange program. One will be joining us today for direct observation. Direct observation. Right. Like observing a supernova from the inside. I've reviewed the files, whispered Yara Lynn, my study partner. She was a Felinian, all soft fur and large eyes, currently trembling like a leaf in a solar storm. This particular human fought in the Keth War. 3 tours. Survived the nightmare of Kepler Station. Hand-to-hand combat specialist. My stomach's all clenched at once. Yes, stomachs, plural. Don't judge. Oh, that's not even the terrifying part, added Zimtok from behind us, his tentacles writhing with anxiety. Apparently, this one volunteers at something called a daycare center in their spare time. Takes care of human offspring for fun. For fun? What kind of psychopath enjoys being around miniature versions of the galaxy's most dangerous predators? The door to the lecture hall opened with a soft hiss. 42 beings collectively held their breath. In walked the human. I'd seen the vids, of course. Read the reports. Studied the anatomical breakdowns. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepares you for seeing a human in person. 2 meters of pure muscle and bone, covered in that deceptively soft-looking skin, binocular predator eyes that could track a target across a battlefield, teeth that could bite through most metals. But this one was smiling. Not the terrifying grimace of a predator about to strike. An actual smile. Warm, genuine, reaching those impossibly blue eyes. It was wearing simple clothes, carrying a bag that looked more suited for school supplies than weapons of mass destruction. "Good morning, everyone." The voice was cheerful, melodious even. Several students flinched anyway. "I'm Marcus Thompson, but please, call me Mark. I'm super excited to be here." Super excited. The apex predator was super excited. Professor Clack9 stepped forward on shaking legs. "Class, this is Human Thompson. He'll be observing our lessons and occasionally participating." "Participating?" Mark said with a chuckle. "Makes it sound like I'm going to dissect something. Don't worry. I left all my scary human stuff at home." Several students looked like they were about to pass out. The Zendari's whining reached a frequency that made my compound eyes water. But then, something unexpected happened. Mark noticed our terror, and instead of reveling in it like any sensible apex predator would, his expression softened with, "Was that concern? Hey, are you all okay? You look a little stressed." Stressed. We were in the presence of a creature that could probably tear through our lecture hall with its bare hands, and it thought we looked stressed. We are adequately functional, Human Thompson. Clack 9 managed, though his voice box was crackling with static. Just Mark, please. Human Thompson makes me sound like some kind of specimen. Which, I guess I kind of am today, huh? This is weird for me, too. Weird for him? This Deathworlder thought this situation was weird for him? Mark set his bag down and looked around for somewhere to sit. The problem was, everywhere he looked, students scrambled away like he was radioactive. Which, for all we knew, he might have been. Humans came from a world with dangerous radiation levels, after all. Finally, he just shrugged and sat cross-legged on the floor in the center of the room. This put him at eye level with most of us, and somehow made him seem less towering, though no less terrifying. So, he said, pulling out what appeared to be a data pad and a writing implement, what are we learning about today? Clack 9's mandibles clicked rapidly. Today's topic, Island Predator-Prey relationships in galactic society. Mark blinked. Once. Twice. Then, he started laughing. Not the maniacal cackle of a predator who'd spotted easy prey. A genuine, from the belly laugh that echoed through the hall. Several students dove under their desks. "Oh, that's rich," Mark said, wiping his eyes. "Let me guess. I'm the predator in this scenario?" The silence was deafening. "Look, I get it," Mark continued, still grinning. "I know what the reports say about humans. We're terrifying murder machines from a nightmare planet, right? Everything on Earth is trying to kill us, so we evolved to be unkillable killing machines ourselves." More nervous shifting. A few whimpers. "But here's the thing nobody mentions in those reports," Mark said, leaning forward conspiratorially. "We also evolved to be really, really good at making friends." Friends. The human wanted to be friends. I mean, think about it, Mark continued, settling more comfortably on the floor. Yeah, Earth is dangerous, but you know what's more dangerous than any predator? Being alone. So we learned to work together. To protect each other. To care about things other than ourselves. He gestured around the room. That you all see a human and think, apex predator. I look around this room and think, wow, look at all these amazing different people I get to meet. Do you know how incredible this is? 43 different species in one room, all learning together. The Zendari's whining had stopped. Cautiously, a few heads peeked out from under desks. I brought pictures, Mark said suddenly, pulling out his data pad. Would you like to see what I do at the daycare center? Before anyone could protest, he was projecting images into the air above us. Small humans, maybe a third of Mark's height, crawling all over him like he was some kind of climbing structure. His face in every image was lit up with joy. This is little Emma, he said, pointing to a tiny human with yellow hair tied in small knots. She's 4. Last week she decided I was a dragon, and she was a knight. Spent the whole afternoon trying to defeat me with a foam sword. More images flashed by. Mark reading to a group of small humans. Mark helping them with something called finger painting, which apparently involved putting colored substances on their hands and making patterns. Mark sleeping on the floor while several tiny humans napped on top of him like he was furniture. And this, Mark said, his voice soft with affection, is Tommy. He's 3, and he has something called autism. It means his brain works differently, and he sometimes gets overwhelmed, but he gives the best hugs in the whole center. The image showed Mark holding a small human who was clutching him tightly, both of them smiling. You volunteer to be attacked by smaller versions of your own species? Yara Lynn asked tentatively. Mark laughed again. That's one way to put it, though I prefer to think of it as professional playground equipment. Slowly, very slowly, some of the tension in the room began to ease. Not disappear, mind you. This was still a human we were talking about, but something about his genuine warmth, his obvious love for these tiny humans, was making it hard to see him as the merciless killer we'd been expecting. Human March Mark, Professor Clack 9 ventured. The reports indicate that your species engages in recreational combat for entertainment. Oh, you mean sports? Mark nodded enthusiastically. Yeah, we love games. Competition can be fun when nobody's actually trying to hurt anyone. Well, mostly nobody. He pulled up another image. Humans in colorful uniforms chasing a spherical object across a green field. This is football. Well, soccer. To Americans like me. 22 people trying to get a ball into a goal using only their feet. It's beautiful to watch when played well. But why? Asked Zimtalk, his tentacles uncurling slightly. What is the purpose of this? Recreational conflict? Mark thought for a moment. Same reason you might enjoy a good puzzle, I guess. It's challenging. It requires skill, teamwork, strategy. And when your team wins, or when someone makes an amazing play, you get this rush of excitement and joy. He scrolled through more images. Humans hitting a small white ball with sticks. Humans swimming at incredible speeds through water. Humans running for what appeared to be no reason other than the running itself. Plus, it's a good way to make friends. I met my best friend Tom playing basketball when we were 12. We've been buddies for over 20 years now. You have maintained a friendship for 20 years? This from one of the Vorthak twins, who had stopped molting and was actually looking interested. Oh, way longer friendships than that exist, Mark said. My grandparents were married for 63 years before Grandpa passed away. My parents have been together for 41 years. Humans. We form really strong bonds. The concept seemed to perplex several species. Among the Vorthak, relationships rarely lasted more than a breeding cycle. The Zendari were largely solitary, except during their crystal-singing ceremonies. But surely, Professor Clack-9 interjected, his scientific mind reasserting itself. This bonding behavior is primarily observed within your own species? The reports indicate humans are highly territorial and aggressive toward outsiders. Mark's expression shifted. Not to anger, as many of us expected, but to something that looked almost like sadness. Yeah, that's not our best trait, he admitted. We do have a history of fighting among ourselves. Wars, conflicts, all sorts of ugliness. But you know what? We're getting better. He pulled up an image of a group of humans, but these ones looked different from each other. Different skin colors, different features, different clothing styles. This is my unit from the military, Mark said quietly. 12 soldiers from 8 different countries on Earth, different religions, different cultures, different languages. But when things got bad, when the Keth were trying to overrun Kepler Station, we fought for each other, died for each other, because that's what humans do when it matters. The room had gone completely silent. Even the usual humming of the environmental systems seemed muted. The war was hell, Mark continued, his voice barely above a whisper. Lost a lot of good people, saw things that still wake me up some nights. But you know what got us through? Taking care of each other, making each other laugh when everything seemed hopeless, sharing pictures from home, celebrating birthdays with whatever rations we could spare. He looked up, meeting the eyes of several students. The reports are right about one thing. Humans can be incredibly dangerous when we need to be, but they miss the most important part. We're dangerous because we love so fiercely. We'll fight tooth and nail for our friends, our families, our communities, not because we enjoy violence, but because we can't stand to see the people we care about get hurt. A soft chime indicated the halfway point of our class period. Nobody moved. I know this is a lot, Mark said gently, and I know I'm probably the scariest thing most of you have ever seen up close. But I want you to know something. Every single one of you is fascinating to me. Your cultures, your perspectives, your ways of seeing the universe. I'd rather spend 100 hours talking with all of you than a single minute fighting anyone. Yara Lynn's ears twitched forward. You would want to talk with us? Are you kidding? Mark's face lit up again. Yara Lin, right? I read about Felinian art in preparation for today. The way your people use scent colors in your paintings is incredible. It's a sensory experience I can't even fully comprehend. And Zimtok, the mathematical concepts your species developed for navigating those underwater cities? Absolutely brilliant. Not for combat purposes, but out of genuine curiosity and respect. Professor Clack 9, Mark continued, I've been reading your papers on interspecies communication theory. The work you're doing to create universal translation protocols could change everything. You're not just teaching language, you're building bridges between worlds. Clack 9's antenna had stopped twitching entirely. If I didn't know better, I'd say our professor was actually pleased. You have read my research? Clack 9 asked, surprise evident in his voice harmonics. All of it I could get my hands on. Though I'll admit, some of the mathematical proofs went over my head. That's okay. Though, humans are good at a lot of things, but we can't be good at everything. That's why we need friends like you to help us understand. Friends, there was that word again. The class period was winding down, but nobody seemed eager to leave. Mark had somehow managed to make the most terrifying lecture of our academic careers into something approaching pleasant. Before I go, Mark said, standing up and stretching, I want to leave you with something to think about. The next time you see a human, or any member of any species really, try to remember that we're all just people trying to make our way in a big, complicated galaxy. We all have hopes and fears and dreams. We all want to be understood, to belong somewhere, to make a difference. He packed up his datapad and shouldered his bag. Oh, and if any of you ever want to chat, my door is always open. I'm staying in the graduate housing complex, room 247. Feel free to stop by anytime. I make a mean cup of hot chocolate. Hot chocolate? We had no idea what that was, but somehow it sounded welcoming. As Mark headed for the door, he paused and looked back at us. By the way, he said with that warm smile, you all did great today. I know this was probably scary for you, but you stuck it out and gave me a chance. That takes courage. I'm proud of you. Proud of us. The human Deathworlder was proud of us. And then he was gone, leaving behind a room full of very confused, very thoughtful students. Well, Professor Clack 9 said finally, his voice box still crackling slightly, that was unexpected. Unexpected was an understatement. We'd prepared to meet a monster, and instead encountered someone who seemed genuinely kind, intelligent, and interested in getting to know us. Professor, Yara Lin asked hesitantly, are all humans like that? Clack 9's compound eyes whirred as he processed the question. I honestly don't know. This is only our second direct interaction with their species. The first was during the treaty negotiations, which were far more formal. He seemed so. Zimtok's tentacles curled thoughtfully. Normal, friendly, even. But he's still a human, one of the Vorthok twins pointed out. Still from a death world, still capable of incredible violence. Yes, I found myself saying, surprising everyone, including myself. But maybe that's not the whole story. The end of class found us all walking out together, something that rarely happened. Usually we scattered to our respective species clusters, but today felt different. Today we had something to talk about. I keep thinking about those pictures, Yara Lin said, as we walked down the corridor. The way he looked at those small humans, like they were the most precious things in the universe. And the way he talked about his military unit, Zimtok added, the loss in his voice when he mentioned the ones who didn't make it home. Proud of us, I murmured, still turning the phrase over in my mind. When's the last time anyone said they were proud of us? We'd reached the main quad, where students from dozens of species were going about their daily routines. But now, instead of seeing the usual divisions and clusters, I found myself wondering about their stories, their hopes and fears, their dreams. Maybe that's what Mark had really taught us today. That everyone has a story worth hearing, no matter how different or frightening they might seem on the surface. So, Yara Lin said quietly, who wants to come with me to room 247 tomorrow? We all stared at her. You're not serious? I am. He invited us. And... She paused, her ears flicking nervously. I want to know what Hot Chocolate Island. Despite everything, despite all our ingrained fears and prejudices, I found myself nodding. I come too. And me, said Zim Talk. One by one, the others agreed. Even the Vorthak twins, who were notorious for avoiding unnecessary social interaction. We were really going to do this. We were going to voluntarily spend time with a human Deathworlder. Our professors would think we'd lost our minds. But as we stood there in the quad, planning our unprecedented visit, I realized something that would have shocked my morning self. I was actually looking forward to it. 24 hours later, we stood outside room 247 like a firing squad facing execution. Except we were the ones who'd volunteered for this madness. Maybe we should knock? Yara Lin suggested, her fur standing on end despite her brave words from yesterday. Or we could just leave, muttered Krixva, the more nervous of the Vorthak twins. Pretend this never happened. Go back to our normal, safe, human-free lives. Too late for that, Zim Talk said, his tentacles coiled tighter than a gravitational spring. He probably already smells our fear. Before any of us could chicken out further, the door slid open on its own. Mark stood there in casual clothing, holding what appeared to be a steaming mug. His face broke into that unnervingly genuine smile when he saw us. Hey, you actually came! He stepped aside, gesturing us in. We had no idea what those were either, but they smelled actually pretty good. His room was nothing like we'd expected. No weapons displays, no military memorabilia, no skulls of defeated enemies. Instead, soft lighting, comfortable furniture, and walls covered with photographs and what appeared to be drawings made by small humans. Welcome to my humble space station, Mark said, setting his mug down on a small table. Sorry about the mess. I'm still getting settled in. Mess? The place was cleaner than most laboratory environments. Please, sit wherever you're comfortable. The couch is pretty sturdy, and I've got floor cushions if anyone prefers that. Oh! And before I forget, he disappeared into what we assumed was a food preparation area, returned with a tray of small, round brown objects, and several more steaming mugs. Hot chocolate as promised, and fresh chocolate chip cookies. Fair warning, they're still warm, so don't burn yourselves. He set the tray down and settled cross-legged on the floor, just like he had in class. The gesture somehow made him seem less imposing, more approachable. So, he said, picking up one of the small brown objects and taking a bite. What would you like to know? I'm an open book. We all just stared at him. This was not how we'd imagined this encounter going. I finally managed. What exactly are we supposed to do here? Whatever you want. Talk, ask questions, try the snacks, complain about professors. You know, normal friend stuff. Normal friend stuff. Right, because we definitely knew what that meant when it involved a human. Yara Lin, bless her curious soul, was the first to move. She approached the tray cautiously, sniffed delicately at one of the mugs, and her ears perked up immediately. Oh, this smells wonderful. Like warm comfort? That's exactly what it is, Mark said, his eyes twinkling. My grandmother's recipe. She used to make it for me whenever I had a bad day. Yara Lin took a small sip, and her entire posture changed. Her fur settled, her tail stopped twitching, and she actually purred a little. This is incredible. What is it? Cocoa powder, milk, sugar, and a secret ingredient. I'm not telling you because then it wouldn't be secret anymore. Mark winked at her. But I will say it involves something called vanilla. Emboldened by Yara Lin's survival, Zimtok reached for a mug with one tentacle while grabbing a cookie with another. His first taste of the hot chocolate produced a color shift I'd never seen before, his skin cycling through pleased purples and satisfied blues. "This island? This is better than fermented kelp wine," he said, sounding shocked. "High praise. Indeed," Mark replied solemnly. "I'll have to tell my grandmother. She'd be thrilled to know her recipe impressed a Tentacrian food connoisseur." One by one, we all tried the mysterious human refreshments. And one by one, we began to relax. It's hard to maintain species-based terror when someone's feeding you warm, delicious things while asking genuinely interested questions about your homeworld's architecture. "So, Vex Taran," Mark said, turning to me as I finished my second cookie, "Professor Clack9 mentioned you're studying xenobiology. What got you interested in that field?" I almost choked on my hot chocolate. "Well, honestly, I wanted to understand why some species are so scary." Mark raised an eyebrow. "Scary how?" "You know, predatory, dangerous, likely to eat you without warning." "Ah," Mark nodded thoughtfully. "And have you found any answers?" I considered this. Yesterday I would have pointed directly at him as Exhibit A. Today was more complicated. I'm starting to think I might have been asking the wrong questions. "Oh? What questions should you have been asking?" I looked around at my classmates, all of them leaning in to hear my answer. All of them, I realized, genuinely interested in what I had to say. When had that started happening? Maybe instead of asking why some species are scary, I should have been asking what makes them worth getting to know despite being scary. Mark's smile was different this time. Softer, somehow. Proud. "Now that," he said, "is a much better question." Krixva, who'd been silent up until now, suddenly spoke up. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Shoot. Yesterday you mentioned the war, the friends you lost. How do you deal with that? The Vorthak don't really do grief the way other species seem to." The room went very quiet. Mark stared into his mug for a long moment before answering. "Some days better than others, honestly. I talked to someone about it. A counselor. Someone trained to help people process difficult experiences." He looked up, meeting Krixva's multifaceted eyes. "But the thing that helps most? Remembering that they died protecting people they cared about. They died so others could live. That's not a tragedy. That's heroism. And the best way I can honor that is by living a life worth their sacrifice." "Is that why you work with the small humans?" asked Yara Lin softly. "Partly. Kids represent hope, you know. The future. When I'm having a rough day, when the memories get too heavy, I go spend time with them and remember that there's still good in the universe worth fighting for." He gestured around the room, at all of us. "Like this. A bunch of different species, from different worlds, sitting together and sharing cookies. My buddy Jake, who died on Kepler Station, he would have loved this. He was always talking about how amazing it would be when the galaxy finally started working together instead of fighting all the time." "What was he like?" Zimtok asked. "Your friend Jake?" Mark's whole face lit up. "Oh man, Jake was hilarious. He had this laugh that was completely contagious. You'd hear him cracking up across the barracks, and suddenly everyone would be laughing too, even if they had no idea what was funny." For the next hour, Mark told us stories about Jake and the others. Not war stories, not tales of heroic combat, but human stories. Jake's terrible attempts at cooking, Maria's habit of singing opera while cleaning her weapons, Tommy's collection of pressed flowers from every planet they visited. "Tommy would have been fascinated by your species," Mark said to one of the Zendari students who'd joined us partway through. "He was always collecting beautiful things. Your crystal formations would have blown his mind." Slowly, carefully, we began sharing our own stories. Yara Lin told us about her littermate who'd become a famous scent painter. Zimtok described the floating blade. gardens of his underwater city. I found myself talking about my parent cluster's research station and the bizarre creatures they studied. Mark listened to everything with the same rapt attention he'd shown yesterday in class. He asked thoughtful questions, made connections between our different experiences, and somehow made each of us feel like the most interesting person in the room. "You know what's funny?" he said as the evening wore on. "I came here expecting to be the weird one, the outsider. But you've all made me feel so welcome. Like I actually belong here." "You do belong here," Yara Lynn said firmly. "You're part of our study group now, whether you like it or not." Study group. When had we become a study group? "Speaking of which," Mark said, glancing at a chronometer on the wall, "don't you all have that big xenocultural essay due next week? For Professor Rinshaw's class?" We all groaned in unison. We'd been dreading that assignment for weeks. "What's the topic again?" Mark asked. "Analyzing the cultural significance of recreational activities across species," Zimtalk said miserably. 3,000 words on how different civilizations use games and entertainment. Mark perked up. "Oh, that sounds fun. I'd love to help if you want. I know a lot about human games, obviously, and I've been reading about recreational practices from other worlds." "You'd do that?" Krix Va asked, sounding shocked. "Help us with homework?" "Of course. That's what friends do, right?" There was that word again. Friends. But this time, none of us flinched. The next few hours turned into an impromptu study session unlike any I'd ever experienced. Mark didn't just offer information about human recreational activities, he helped us think through the deeper cultural implications. Why did the Zendari create crystal symphonies? What did Vorthak molting competitions reveal about their social structure? How did Felinian scent games strengthen community bonds? "You're really good at this," I told him as he helped me organize my thoughts about chitinous sports hierarchies. "Have you considered teaching?" Mark blushed. Actually blushed. The terrifying human Deathworlder was embarrassed by a compliment. "I've thought about it," he admitted. "After my military service is up, maybe teach physical education or coach youth sports. I like working with kids." "You should do it," Yara Lynn said decisively. "You explain things in a way that makes sense. And you make people feel safe to ask questions." Safe. We felt safe with the human. How had that happened? As the night wound down and we prepared to leave, laden with leftover cookies and feeling better about our essay prospects, Mark walked us to the door. "Same time next week?" he asked hopefully. "I'm planning to try making something called pizza. Fair warning, it involves melted cheese, which might be weird for some of your digestive systems, but I can make alternatives." We all agreed immediately. The idea of missing next week's gathering was unthinkable, but as we walked back through the corridors toward our own dormitories, chattering excitedly about human pizza and crystal symphonies and the connections between Tentacrian mathematics and underwater architecture, I realized something profound had shifted. For the first time since arriving at the academy, we weren't walking in species-segregated groups. Yara Lynn was comparing notes with one of the Zendari students. Zim Tak and the Vorthak twins were debating the philosophical implications of competitive molting. I found myself in animated conversation with beings I'd barely spoken to before. Mark hadn't just shared his culture with us. He'd somehow shown us how to share ours with each other. "You know what I think?" Yara Lynn said, as we reached the intersection where our paths diverged to different dormitory wings. "What?" "I think the reports were wrong about humans." "How so?" "Galaxy, because they're predators," she said thoughtfully. "They're dangerous because they make you want to be better than you are. They make you want to be brave enough to try new things, kind enough to help your friends, curious enough to learn about people who are different from you. So they conquer through friendship instead of force? Something like that." As I settled into my sleeping alcove that night, reviewing the day's events, I found myself thinking about that first moment when Mark had walked into our classroom. The terror we'd all felt, the assumptions we'd made, the barriers we'd built in our minds. And then I thought about him sitting on his floor, surrounded by different species, patiently helping us understand not just human culture, but our own cultures better. The way he'd listened to our stories like they mattered. The way he'd made each of us feel seen and valued and important. Maybe that's what made humans truly dangerous. Not their capacity for violence, but their capacity for connection. Their ability to look at a room full of frightened aliens and see potential friends. Their willingness to be vulnerable, to share their pain and their joy, to trust that others would care. My communication pad chimed softly. A message from Mark. Thanks for coming tonight. I haven't felt this happy in a long time. Sleep well, friends. Friends. We were friends with a human. And you know what? It was the best thing that had ever happened to us. The semester continued, but everything was different now. Our weekly gatherings at Mark's place became the highlight of our week. He taught us human games like charades and Pictionary, which were hilarious disasters when attempted by tentacled beings and creatures with compound eyes. We taught him Felinian harmony singing and Zendari crystal resonance techniques. Professor Clack9 noticed the change in our class dynamics immediately. Instead of species-segregated seating, we mixed together naturally. Instead of competing for grades, we collaborated on projects. Instead of fearing our differences, we celebrated them. I don't know what Human Thompson did to you all, he said one day after a particularly engaging discussion about interspecies communication. But whatever it was, it's remarkable. You've become a real community. Mark, who'd become a regular fixture in our classes, just smiled. I didn't do anything, Professor. I just gave them an excuse to be as awesome as they already were. 3 months later, when the exchange program ended and Mark prepared to return to human space, none of us wanted to say goodbye. This isn't goodbye, he said firmly, as we gathered in his now empty room for one last pizza party. This is see you later. The galaxy's getting smaller every day. We'll run into each other again. Promise? Yara Lynn asked, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Promise? Besides, I expect wedding invitations when you all start pairing off with members of other species. I want to see how Tentacrian Felinian hybrid offspring turn out. We all laughed, but it was bittersweet. Our little community was scattering, heading back to homeworlds and new assignments across the galaxy. But Mark was right. The galaxy was getting smaller, and we carried a piece of him with us wherever we went. The courage to reach out to strangers, the wisdom to look beyond surface differences, the understanding that friendship was the most powerful force in the universe. Years later, when I became a professor myself, I always told my students about the human who taught me that the scariest things in life were often the most worth getting to know. Some of them thought I was crazy, but the ones who listened, who took the risk of reaching beyond their comfort zones, they discovered what I had learned that day in room 247. The universe is full of friends we just haven't met yet. And sometimes, the very thing that terrifies us most might just be exactly what we need to become who we're meant to be. After all, a killer had walked into our class that day, but instead of destroying us, he had taught us how to live.